Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Yusuf Aram. In 2019, the U.S. removed Turkey from the F-35 program and later sanctioned Ankara over its purchase of Russian S-400 missiles. But President Donald Trump recently said he's now reconsidering selling the fighter jets to Turkey. Despite the potential breakthrough, other countries, especially in NATO, are starting to rethink their reliance on U.S. weapons. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan recently met his U.S. counterpart Marco Rubio in Washington, discussing everything from Gaza to Ukraine. They also touched on the possible lifting of sanctions on Turkey's defense industry. Trump signaled last month that he was open to selling F-35s to Turkey on the condition that the S-400 systems remain inactive. Meanwhile, some NATO members are reconsidering their F-35 purchases. Portugal and Canada have announced they are exploring alternatives. Has the U.S.'s famed fifth-generation fighter lost some of its allure? And should Ankara seek to acquire the jets? For more, joining me now from Annapolis, Maryland, is Stephen Harrell. He's a non-resident senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis. From Istanbul, Zuhal Mert Uzuner, a Marmara University professor and director of its Research Center for International Relations. And from Seoul, Kwang-ho Chun, professor at Jeonbuk National University. Ladies and gentlemen, a much-awaited meeting between the top diplomats of Turkey and the United States. It looks like a lot was talked about, so we got a lot to cover. Stephen, I want to begin with the F-35 and the sanctions placed on Turkey's defense industry. Is the Trump administration really considering this? Is it time for it to be lifted and Turkey to rejoin or reintegrate back into the F-35 program?
I think that's a possibility. So repairing Turkey and U.S. relations, going back to the purchase of the S-400 and the expulsion from the F-35 program is long overdue. What exactly that entails certainly remains to be seen. There's also a lot of other turmoil related to the F-35 program, given some of the other NATO allies making their remarks about it.
Zuhal, there is a lot of turmoil, as Stephen said. Now, it's been basically 5 years since Turkey has been out of the program, and they didn't just sit there and cry about it. They've been developing Plan B, Plan C, the Khan, the Kızıl Elma, domestic solutions. Turkey is also flirting around with the Eurofighter. Does Turkey still need the F-35, or has it made a sound Plan B that it could go ahead without purchasing the F-35?
Most probably, Turkey will continue its own way to develop its own technology about fighter jets. I think today, let's say the upper hand for the Turkish authorities is tightly related with this new situation and the capabilities of Turkish defense industry. And of course, I think that the change of administration in Washington is a very important factor for understanding that this S-400s could be a minor problem with some other methods to solve this issue. So for Turkey, this F-35's matter is still an important issue because, as you know, Turkey was not only purchasing actor, and also we were investor for this project. So from this perspective, of course, Turkey will be interested in this project and returning back to the project. And of course, Turkey will be interested to lifting up these embargoes and other unnecessary and sometimes irrational the processes started in the last 5 years.
Kwang-ho, the F-35 seems to have lost some of its allure. A track record that has a lot of question marks in its short time in service. As we just stated, Turkey does have Plan B. Do you think it's wise for Turkey to enter back into the F-35 program or go ahead with something that has a more proven track record like the Eurofighter Typhoon?
Okay, in my opinion, I also agree with the former colleague said. Definitely, you are developing Khan, which is a good fighter, but of course, the change of the regime in the United States will give you a chance, will give Turkey a chance to purchase F-35 as a secondary option.
So, Stephen, a new administration, does this mean that there's going to be a clean slate according to the Biden administration, that Trump's approach to Turkey is going to be much more different?
I think you have a different approach from any administration, but it's exactly what that approach would be, right? So there's some real problems with the S-400 and the F-35, to use that specific existing alongside. But I think it's also important, and from the talks between Secretary Rubio and Minister Fidan, that, find those areas where we do have shared interests and where we can cooperate and collaborate and move on from there.
Zuhal, I want to also talk about the sanctions. How important are lifting of the sanctions that are imposed on the defense industry for Turkey? Was that really a major talking point in the meeting between top diplomats?
I suppose yes, because at the end we are two NATO allies, and this is sometimes beyond the, let's say, the rationality to have such kind of embargoes. Turkey and United States had different positions, especially about the Ukrainian war and the relations with Russia. But as you can see, all of them are political evaluations, and that can be evaluated different by different governments. And today we experience that, and I think this existing government in United States now can understand the sensitivities of this NATO ally. At the end, if the target is the same, maybe there can be a kind of disagreements and different point of views, and if there is a way to solve them or meet at a point, so I think that will be great for lifting up these embargoes for a NATO member, which became always very important for security and stability in our region.
Kwang Ho, I want to talk a little about the relationship between the Americans and Europe now. A leaked chat showed a lot of animosity from the top levels of the Trump administration towards Europe, especially regarding security. Trump has openly spoken about this. Vice President J.D. Vance has openly spoken about this as well, that they want to see Europe carry its own load, at least regarding a security perspective. So there's been a lot of talk in Brussels regarding a new security architecture. How do you see that unfolding, and is there space for Turkey inside of what could be a new European army in the future?
In my opinion, I think the international environment has been changing a lot in these days, especially Trump administration. He's emphasizing about the friendship with Putin, and also he's at the same time he's pushing European countries to pay more defense budgets. So those kind of changes, changes of international environments, makes sometimes a crisis in European and NATO security environment. At the same time, it is definitely an opportunity to deepening the defense cooperation between European states and also possibly with the USA.
Stephen, how much of a crossroads are we at for NATO right now? And does this rhetoric coming from the Trump administration mean that it wants to see a European army formed, that it wants to decouple a little from a security perspective for Europe, where it'll come in if it needs to be, but it doesn't want to be as hands-on as it has in the past. It doesn't want to have the troop numbers that it has in the past and concentrate more on the Pacific or, say, China?
I think I would start with the point that what makes America great is our alliances and our friendships. The last 80 years post-World War II, it's been being a part of the international order. And that's why America's been successful and prosperous and strong. So it's one thing to talk about focusing on the Indo-Pacific and asking our European allies to contribute more within a structure like NATO. It's a completely different one to talk about invading them. Even specific to the leaked chat, they were talking about operations against the Houthis. And a year ago, when we did Operation Prosperity Garden, the UK Royal Navy, Norway, the Netherlands, Finland, all of those allies participated because when you center on your allies, you get that contributory and participatory reaction. And when you try to antagonize them, it's going to weaken America. It's an America alone policy that's going to result.
Zuhal, Erdogan's been very vocal about Europe lately as well. He says there's no European Union without Turkey, at least a future for the European Union. Now, if a European army is to be formed, where NATO might have a downgraded presence, a downgraded mission, is that something that Erdogan wants to be a part of? Does he definitely want to see Turkey in a European army, or is that a question mark in his mind as well? And also EU membership. Is he all in on EU membership, or is this rhetoric right now?
Actually, for EU membership, what kind of impact that may create is a big discussion topic right now. At the end, there are some other requirements in the previous discussions. But if there is an intention for developing a global agenda for European Union, we know that European Union by itself, as we can see today in this form, it is very difficult to continue by excluding Turkey, because Turkey always became a very important, critical partner for defense cooperation in our geography. If we remember from the beginning of the story construction, or let's say the strengthening of the Turkish Air Force, and all these stories shows that this Western alliance is somehow interdependent with Turkey. But of course, it won't be the direct stimulator maybe for an EU membership process, but it will be very important contribution for rethinking about this position, because we know that there is a kind of deadlock because of several issues in EU-Turkey relations. And now it kind of, maybe we can call it as a transactional way of thinking, may help to overcome some difficulties and enlarging EU's capacity by looking at from a different angle, by including Turkey. But what I see for now, EU countries, especially some of the countries which have somehow problem with Turkey, try to use another option by preparing several agreements, defense agreements, instead of directly going to the full membership for Turkey.
Mm-hmm. Kwang Ho, when we look at the rhetoric, the decoupling a little between European NATO and the United States, the push for peace in Ukraine, the ceasefire in Gaza, or trying to keep it viable at least, Syria kind of reaching calmer days, let's say. Is Trump really pushing for the Pacific shift that's been talked about for the past decade? Does he really now want to spend the rest of his 3.5 years engaging China, whether it be peacefully, whether it be rhetorically, whether it be more than that? Is that now the top agenda in Washington for Trump?
Yes, I definitely think so. Donald Trump's policy is somehow quite clear. That means that he's going to push more European allies to pay more defense budgets, as well as the other allies in the whole world, such as South Korea too. And that means that we have to think about a kind of challenges and changes of NATO framework. I think it's important to go back to think about when there was a Kosovo crisis. By that time, NATO was able to compete against the crisis with their air force. But unfortunately, the European infantry was not able to be formed. I think we have to learn something about that. Definitely, yes.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, so there's been some advancement on peace in Ukraine. There's been talks between the U.S. and Russia, talks between the Ukrainians and the Americans as well. From this point on, what next steps are you expecting from the Trump administration?
I hope that we see steps towards what would be a sustainable and lasting peace for Ukraine. So a ceasefire that concedes everything to Russia, and whether that's some version of realpolitik, or whether that's the personal relationship between Trump and Putin, is not, in fact, a sustainable and long-term peace. So I think we need to make sure that Russia is making concessions as well, and that we're giving Ukraine the security guarantees that they need, that a ceasefire is not just an opportunity for Russia to rearm and to recharge.
Mm-hmm. Zuhal, Rubio and Fidan also talked about Ukraine. Now, Turkey, over the past 3 years, has been very active, whether it's the grain corridor deal, the meeting between then Foreign Minister Kuleba and his Russian counterpart Lavrov in Antalya, prisoner swap deal. What type of value can Erdogan add to Trump's initiatives regarding peace?
First of all, Turkey's initiatives for a peace, or at least a kind of ceasefire, prepared an important base. Maybe today we are not at that point. The reality has changed a lot. Maybe the Russian side or the Ukrainian side may ask something more or less. But at the end, that creates a kind of the beginning point for this, let's say, the negotiations. From that perspective, Turkey's the role as a kind of the actor, the both sides may trust to explain maybe their own standpoint. Turkey may be a kind of, let's say, the mediator between these actors. And also, we know that the personal, let's say, the conducts play a very critical role. When we remember previous initiatives, especially between President Putin and President Erdogan. So I see the similar sympathy or a kind of trust relationship with also Zelensky. So Turkey may help as an actor, as a state from the region, to bring both sides together on a platform of trust. So I think Turkey can be very helpful for that process.
Kwango, when we look at Trump's initiatives in Ukraine, how much of his motivation is based on European security, ensuring it, peace in Ukraine, versus trying to drive a wedge between Russia and China? Do you think that's part of his calculus?
I think so, yes. As we all saw the previous talks between Zelensky and Trump, Donald Trump's position and J.D. Vance was very clear that a security guarantee toward Ukraine was actually denied. That means that it is a kind of passing of the ball to the European side. So I think we have to remember that Trump's position is quite clear. And he's going to concentrate more on China in near future rather than the Ukraine and the Russian war. Of course, after the ceasefire or end of the war between Ukraine and Russia, directly the next point will be toward China.
Stephen, I want to ask you about Syria now. Since, I believe, about 2014, the Americans have been entrenched there, something that Trump wants to wash his hands away from. 2019, there was a partial withdrawal. There's been talk about a full withdrawal. Do you see that happening, and do you see Trump cooperating with Turkey on that withdrawal?
Whether it's Syria or Iraq or the current activity against the Houthis in Yemen, we very often say we want to do less and withdraw from the Middle East, and yet we remain there. Not only is it a flashpoint for problems, Iran and all their proxies and their malign influence, as well as the ISIS, other transnational terrorist groups, we just can't get away. So I'm not optimistic about the chances for a full withdrawal from the region. But we do need to consider that if we're going to focus on China, as my colleague said, how do we rely on our European allies more, and how do we disentangle from some of the problems in the Middle East, and other countries like Turkey will play a role.
Mm-hmm. So Zuhal, Stephen's saying the major issues on the administration's mind would be the counterterrorism operation against ISIS, continuing that, also the presence of Iran. Is that a role that Turkey could pick up and shoulder the burden if the U.S. withdraws from Syria?
I think Turkey has a huge capacity to create a kind of, let's say, I don't want to say service, but at the end, it's a kind of contribution for the peace and prosperity in the region. It's not only related with the military involvement, it is also related with diplomatic and political involvement. Since the beginning of that process, Turkey contributed a lot. And Turkey was saying in its own, let's say, the foreign policy discourse, the problems deriving from transnational terrorist networks can be solved only by relying on multilateralism. There is no other way. So you cannot cooperate with non-state actors to fight another terrorist group. So I think Turkey can contribute a lot as a very important and reliable, important power in the region. Mm-hmm. Yes, my answer is yes, Turkey will be very important for creation of a regional peace on the base of international norms and rules.
Kwang Ho, I want to ask you a little about the Middle East now. There's been a lot of talk between the nations as well. There's been meetings between the Turks, the Jordanians, the Iraqis, the Lebanese. The GCC's been meeting. It seems like they're trying to also create a new security architecture for themselves. Can Middle Eastern nations provide their own regional security in the absence of the United States?
That might be a very difficult question because GCC could do something, but without the United States as a sole superpower in the world right now, I don't think that they can create something by their own negotiation, especially there are some conflicts, ongoing conflicts in Gaza and in Yemen and also in Syria. All those kind of conflicts has different characteristics. In that terms, that it will be very difficult for them only to make some solutions by themselves.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, I want to ask you about Gaza since Kwang Ho also touched on it. Now, that's an issue that Turkey and Israel obviously don't see eye to eye on. Many of the Muslim nations don't see eye to eye on. Trump all in on trying to secure a ceasefire, but shaky at best, violated many times at the reality, let's call it. Is Gaza a flashpoint issue that Trump might fail on?
I think it's definitely a possibility to not succeed in that, because look at just decades and generations that we've been unable to get to a sustainable and long-term peace in the Middle East between Israel as a nation state and the Palestinian people. It's a tough problem. It hasn't been solved before, so suggesting that that President Trump will somehow find a solution that's escaped everyone for decades is going to be difficult.
Zuhal, when Trump looks at the region, his two closest allies, probably his NATO ally, Turkey, and personal friend Erdogan, and also Israel, his personal friend Netanyahu, but Erdogan and Netanyahu at each other's necks. Does Trump want to see Turkey and Israel play nice in the region? How could he also achieve that if he does?
Under these circumstances, it's very difficult right now because the very big violations of human rights, and it's actually a kind of genocide right now, is continuing. So this is really difficult. So what is the right thing is using this multilateralism and its own principles. What Turkey says this actually, and Turkey is not denying the worries and sensitivities of Israel. So I think Israel must get off the stuck point of security by ignoring whatever exists as a part of humanity for all of us. So returning back to this, let's say a normal, the security mechanisms is very critical for any kind of normalization for Turkish-Israeli relations. As you know, Turkey never denied the right to exist in this region as a state, as a nation. So it's not a problem, but What is problem here is genocide. So this is not acceptable at all, and that must be stopped as soon as possible for the benefit of everybody.
That's all the time we have for today. Stephen Zwal Kwangho, thank you for joining me. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Yusuf Aram. If you got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find more exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.